My name is Delia Marsh, and I'm 31 years old. 2 weeks ago, at my engagement party, the woman who was about to become my mother-in-law lifted her glass, smiled at a ballroom full of people, and said, "My son needs a wife who belongs in our world, not the daughter of a woman who scrubbed bedpans in the very hospital that made this family rich." She said it in front of 140 guests. My fiancé sat right beside me and didn't move. When his mother told him to keep his seat, he kept it. I slid my ring off my finger, set it down on the white tablecloth, and walked out. What none of them knew was that for the past 4 months, I'd been holding a secret his grandfather had pressed into my hands the week before he died. They didn't know what I'd found buried in their family's perfect charity. And when I walked into a boardroom 11 days later, everything my mother-in-law thought she owned came apart in front of her. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it actually started. The engagement party was at the Whitlock Conservatory in Cincinnati, one of those glass and iron places where the city's old money likes to host things, so the rest of us understand exactly what we'll never have. Orchids everywhere, waiters in white gloves carrying trays you weren't supposed to touch unless they offered. A string quartet tucked behind a wall of ferns. I'd been told the flowers alone ran $22,000, and I believed it, because I'd seen the invoice sitting on the kitchen island of the Calloway house when nobody thought I was paying attention. I was paying attention. I'm always paying attention. You learn that when you grow up the way I did. I sat at the head table, squeezed between Brennan and one of his great-aunts, whose name I never did catch. The place cards had the Calloway family crest stamped in gold foil. Even the napkins had it. In families like that, dinner comes with a reminder of who you're dining with. Vivian Calloway sat at the center of the table like she'd been carved there. My fiancé's mother. She was the kind of woman who could insult you so gently you'd thank her for it before you realized what she'd done. She tapped her glass with a spoon and the room went quiet and she stood. I thought it would be a toast. A welcome. Something warm enough to get us through the night. "We're so delighted to have everyone here," she began, and her voice was pleasant, almost musical. I felt Brennan's hand find mine under the table. Brennan has always been a generous boy. Too generous, maybe. You know that feeling when a room changes temperature? When you can sense, half a second before it happens, that someone is about to say a thing that can't be unsaid. That's what I felt. "But I owe it to all of you to be honest tonight," Vivian went on, and she never raised her voice. That was the worst part. She didn't need to. My son deserves a wife who understands what our name means, not a girl whose mother spent 30 years emptying bedpans in the hospital this family built. We don't begrudge anyone honest work, of course. But there's a difference between the people who clean a place and the people who own it. I heard a fork hit a plate somewhere to my left. Then another. Then nothing at all, 140 people, and you could hear the air conditioning. You could hear someone's chair creak. An older woman 2 tables over, a friend of the grandfather's I'd later learn, put her hand over her mouth. Brennan's cousin Rhett, the one the family barely spoke to since he'd come out and married a man, started to rise from his seat, and his husband caught his sleeve and held him down. My heart was slamming, but my hands were steady. That surprised me. I'd always wondered how I'd react if it ever came to this, and now I knew. Steady hands. I looked at Brennan. Not at his mother. At him. "Brennan," I said. Just his name. I gave him the chance. "Mom," he said, barely above a whisper. "Come on, that's not—" "Sit down, Brennan." She didn't even look at him when she said it. The grown-ups are speaking, and I watched it happen. I watched the calculation move across my fiancé's face, the weighing of me against her, of doing the right thing against doing the easy thing. His chair shifted a half-inch as he started to stand, and then he didn't. He settled back down. That tiny sound, the wooden legs, scraping and then going still. That's the thing I'll remember for the rest of my life. Not her words. Not the silence. The sound of the man I was supposed to marry, choosing to stay seated. My fingers went to the ring. Platinum band, an old European cut diamond that had belonged to his grandmother. Brennan had been so proud the day his grandfather handed it to him. He said you were the only one he'd ever want wearing it, he'd told me. I believed that meant something soft. I'd find out later it meant something else entirely. I took the ring off slowly. I wanted them to see me do it. I set it on the tablecloth, and it made a small, clean sound against the china, the only sound in a room full of people holding their breath. I stood up. I looked at Vivian, not at her son. My mother, I said, and my voice came out calmer than I'd ever heard it. Worked harder in one shift than you've worked in your entire pampered life. She did it with more dignity than you'll ever own. And she did it so I'd never have to depend on people like you. Then I walked out, 51 steps from the head table to the front doors. I counted them, because counting kept me from crying, kept my back straight, kept my shoes from stumbling on that polished marble. The valet brought my car around, a 2017 Toyota Corolla with a cracked cuff holder. Brennan had offered a dozen times to buy me something nicer. I'd always said no. Standing there in the cold with my engagement on the table behind me, I finally understood why some part of me had always refused. I'd always wanted my own way out. My phone was buzzing before I cleared the parking lot. By the time I got home, it showed 22 missed calls. I didn't answer one. In the rearview mirror, just before I turned onto the main road, I saw Brennan come running out the front doors. He stood on the steps and watched my taillights go. He didn't get in his car. He never did chase me. Not once in 2 years. I got back to my apartment in Northside a little after 10. One bedroom, $8.90 a month, paid for with my own salary from the foundation where I worked. Not his family's money. I kept waiting to fall apart, and it never came. Instead, I put the kettle on and made tea, too strong. The way my mom used to make it the nights my dad's disability checks didn't stretch far enough. I sat down at my little kitchen table and pulled out the folder I'd been keeping in a fireproof box in my closet for 2 months. The label on the tab read, in my own handwriting, Callaway Children's Fund. 290 pages. Bank statements, falsified invoices, denial letters, board minutes where Vivian had voted to reject treatment grants she later claimed had never qualified. Emails, spreadsheets. The whole paper skeleton of a woman who believed she would never be caught. On the windowsill, I had a photo of Brennan's grandfather, Edmund Callaway. We'd taken it together at the Foundation's spring luncheon, back when I was just the new program director, and he was just a sharp old man who liked to ask me hard questions. Before he asked me the one that changed everything. I sat there staring at his face for a long time. Then my father graduated, said Rhett Callaway. I picked up. Delia. Brennan's cousin sounded out of breath. Are you okay? I was about to drive over, but Sam said I should call first. I'm fine. You're not fine. That was the most. He stopped himself. I should have stood up. I'm sorry, I tried. You did try, I said. I saw you. Sam saved you a worse night than I had. He let out a shaky laugh and then his voice dropped. Listen, there's something you need to know. After you left, Aunt Vivian got on the phone. She's calling an emergency board meeting. 9 a.m. tomorrow. She's going to move to have you removed from the foundation board. I'd expected this. Some part of me had been counting on it. On what grounds? She's saying Grandpa wasn't of sound mind when he put you on the board, that you took advantage of a sick old man, and, Delia. He hesitated. She's talking about filing for a restraining order. She wants to claim you, I don't even want to say it, that you seduced Brennan to get at the foundation's money. The clock on my stove read 11:43. Rhett, I said, what day did your grandfather die? A confused silence. August 9th. Why does that? He appointed me to the board on June 2nd. More than 2 months before he passed. He was completely lucid. His attorney witnessed it. So did his oncologist. And so did a psychiatrist he hired on purpose, specifically to document that he knew exactly what he was doing. I heard Rhett's breath catch. Your aunt can't remove me. The bylaws don't allow it without cause and a unanimous vote, and I have something she doesn't know exists. What? Your grandfather's last words, I said. In writing, notarized, witnessed, dated. There was a long pause. Delia, what are you going to do? I looked at the folder. At Edmund's face on the windowsill. At 290 pages of stolen futures. I'm going to finish what he asked me to finish. After I hung up, I didn't sleep. I sat down at my laptop and started writing an email. The timestamp would later read 12:41 a.m. Subject line: Emergency meeting of the Callaway Children's Fund Board of Directors. Fiduciary breach and financial irregularities. In the body I wrote, plainly and without a single wasted word, that pursuant to Article 7, Section 4 of the Foundation bylaws, I was calling an emergency meeting of the board to address fiduciary breach and financial irregularities. I named the date, 11 days out, the legal minimum for notice. I named the place, not their offices downtown, but the conference room at my own programs building in Over the Rhine. My turf. Attendance mandatory per the bylaws. Evidence packets attached. I copied every one of the 11 board members. I copied the family attorney. I copied an IRS special agent in the Cincinnati field office whose name I'd gotten through the watchdog group I worked with on the side. I copied an assistant attorney general in the Ohio AG's charitable law section. And I copied a reporter at the Cincinnati Enquirer who covered nonprofit accountability. The attachment was 41 megabytes. 290 pages. I hit send at 12:41 in the morning and sat there in the quiet listening to my old printer chug out 23 copies, one for every person who'd be in that room. Then I set my coffee maker for 5:30 and lay down and stared at the ceiling. My phone buzzed once more. A text from Brennan. Delia, please. I'm so sorry. Can we talk? I read it twice. Then I deleted it. Some conversations don't deserve to happen. Let me tell you how I got here. How the daughter of a hospital housekeeper ended up holding the power to take apart one of Cincinnati's oldest families. It started with a letter. I was 18. My dad had been gone 2 years. A back injury that turned into surgeries, that turned into pills, that turned into a heart, that just stopped one morning. No life insurance worth the name. My mother worked the overnight housekeeping shift at Callaway Memorial, mopping floors and emptying the rooms of people who never once learned her name. The letter came on Callaway Children's Fund stationery, a little lighthouse logo in the corner. Congratulations! I had been selected for a full nursing scholarship. Tuition, books, 4 years. I'd been accepted to the program at the university, but there was no money. There was never any money, and I'd already made peace with deferring and working retail until I could afford a semester at a time. My mother read that letter standing at our kitchen counter, with her hands still raw and red from bleach, and she cried in a way I had never seen her cry. Your father, she said, and couldn't finish. I didn't know then that the family that paid for my education would one day hand me the power to bring one of their own to her knees. I didn't know Edmund Callaway existed. Not yet. I met him for the first time the spring before all of this. By then, I'd graduated, worked 4 years as a pediatric nurse, burned out on the floor, and come back to the foundation that had saved my life. This time as a program director helping run the very scholarships and treatment grants that had once kept me afloat. The annual spring luncheon. I gave a short talk. The standard thing. The first-generation success story they trot out to make the donors feel good about their write-offs. Afterward, an old man in a wheelchair rolled up to me. 88, eyes like a hawk, a name tag in shaky handwriting that read, E. Callaway, founder. You were the 2012 scholar, he said. Not a question. Your application essay was about your father's hands. I was stunned, he remembered. Hundreds of kids over the decades, and he remembered mine. Yes, sir. He fixed engines before his back gave out. He gave me a real smile, not the practiced kind I'd learned to spot at 100 paces. Have coffee with me next week, he said. There's something I'd like to discuss. You don't say no to the man who paid for your degree. I had no idea what he was about to ask. We met at a little place on Vine Street. Nothing fancy. Somewhere he said I'd feel comfortable. He ordered his coffee black, no sugar, same as me. And in the first 5 minutes he told me he was dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 6 months if he was lucky. His family didn't know yet. He wanted to talk about the foundation, about what would happen to it, about legacy. He asked careful questions about Vivian, his daughter-in-law who'd run the fund for the last decade. Testing questions. Do you deal with her much in your work? I was diplomatic. We submit our grant requests through her office. It's a thorough process. He looked at me hard. That's a politician's answer. His hand shook when he reached for his cup, and he saw me see it. I don't have time for politicians' answers, Delia. So I'll be direct. I need to know if you're as brave as that essay made you sound. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. He leaned in. Because I need someone brave, and I think it might be you. The real conversation came 2 months later in his study at the Callaway estate up in Indian Hill, one of those houses that makes you feel small just by walking in. He was much worse by then, down 30 pounds, an oxygen line under his nose. He sent his nurse out before I even sat down. He handed me a folder. I've known for almost 2 years that Vivian's been stealing, he said. No softening it. I hired a private investigator. This is everything. I opened it. Bank statements, wire transfers, shell company filings, the numbers blurred. Mr. Callaway, I said. This is nearly $6 million. 6.3, he corrected me. Taken from sick children, children like you were. He was crying. The silent kind, the kind that comes when you're too worn out to sob. I asked him the obvious thing. Why not go to the police? Because I'm a coward, he said simply, like it was just a fact about the weather. I built this place to be clean. If I expose her now, in public, with my name on the front page, the donors scatter. The board panics. Everything I spent 50 years building falls in on itself. The children who depend on us today lose everything because of what she did. He shook his head. I can't be the one to burn it down, but it has to be burned, the part that's rotten. So what do you want from me? He slid a thinner folder across the desk. 6 letters, each one notarized. I'm putting you on the board next month. Vivian will get the notice and write it off as a dying man's sentiment. She won't know I'm giving you veto power over any single disbursement above $250,000, and she won't know about these. He tapped the letters. I'm going to confront her. More than once. Every time I'm going to write down exactly what she says, and a psychiatrist and my attorney are going to witness each one, so no one can ever claim I imagined it. When I'm gone, these become yours. Use them when the time comes. I looked at him, this dying old man asking me to take a knife to his own family. If I do this, I said slowly, I'll lose Brennan. He reached out and gripped my hand, and his grip was stronger than it had any right to be. If you don't do this, dozens of children lose their chance. Which one weighs more? I thought about my father's hands. My mother's raw red ones. 18-year-old me reading that letter at the kitchen counter. I'll do it. Edmund Callaway died in August. The funeral was family only, and I wasn't family, not really, not anymore. But I went to the public memorial 4 days later, sat in the back, the folder already in my bag. Vivian gave the eulogy in a black suit I happened to know cost more than my mother used to make in 2 months. My father-in-law gave his life to lifting up the less fortunate, she said. His legacy will live on through this foundation. Beautiful, hollow words. His legacy will live on, I thought from the back row. Just not the way you mean. After the service, his attorney found me and handed me a small sealed envelope. Inside was a note in Edmund's shaky hand, dated 8 days before he died. Finish what I couldn't. I trust you, E.C. I've carried it in my wallet ever since. Here's the part that still makes my stomach turn. I'd already started digging before Edmund ever recruited me. Months before our coffee on Vine Street, the watchdog group I volunteered with, a small outfit that investigates fraud in charitable nonprofits, had gotten an anonymous tip. Look into the Callaway Children's Fund. Grant denials, the last 5 years. Cross-reference the rejected families against the foundation's ballooning administrative costs. Something doesn't add up. I'd read it 3 times before I understood that someone was asking me to investigate the very foundation that had paid for my education, the family of the man I loved. It took me 3 weeks of nights and weekends to find the pattern. The 990 filings are public. I pulled 6 years of them. The fund held an endowment north of 200 million. It reported handing out around 4 million a year in scholarships and treatment grants, but the administrative overhead had climbed from 9 to 23% over 5 years. Where had the money gone? I found it in the consulting fees. 4 firms, all registered in Delaware within the same 8-month stretch. No websites, no employees, the same registered agent. Strategic Family Advisory, Heritage Partners Group, Queen City Management, Northgate Solutions. I traced what I could. Every payment to all 4 had been approved by V. Calloway, and when our group's legal counsel polled what they could poll, every dollar funneled to a single personal account. But the numbers weren't the worst of it. The worst of it was the families. I tracked down 9 of the parents whose grant applications had been denied. A mother in Walnut Hills whose son needed a specialist his insurance wouldn't cover. A father in Covington who'd applied 2 years running and given up. They had "thank you for your interest" letters with Vivian's signature on the bottom. They had kids who'd gone without. One woman sat across from me in a coffee shop and told me her daughter had waited 14 months for a procedure. The fund could have covered 10 times over, and I sat in my car afterward and shook. Edmund's letters filled in the rest. I read them after he died. 6 of them, each notarized, each witnessed by a psychiatrist and his attorney. The 4th one was the one that broke me. In his blue fountain pen ink he'd written that he had confronted Vivian directly, laid the bank statements on the desk in front of her, and she hadn't even bothered to deny it. She'd looked at him and said, "What are you going to do, Edmund? Tell the board? They'll think you've lost your mind. Go to the police and watch 100 years of the family name turn to ash?" And then, he wrote, she smiled at me and said, "You're dying anyway. Soon all of this is mine." I read that sitting alone in my apartment a week after his memorial, and I cried for the first time since the engagement party that, at that point, hadn't even happened yet. He had carried this alone for 2 years, watching her steal from sick children, too frightened of scandal to stop her. Brave and completely alone. I whispered to the empty room that I wouldn't let him down. By the end of the summer, I had everything. A complete case. Federal violations, state violations, civil exposure, criminal exposure. And I had a problem. I was engaged to Brennan Calloway and I loved him, and I was about to take a wrecking ball to his family. I tried to tell him. 14 times I counted, all that summer. 14 moments where the words were right there in my mouth. "Your mother is stealing from dying children." And every single time I stopped, because once I said it out loud, I could never take it back. And because there was something I needed to know first. I needed to know whether Brennan would choose what was right over what was easy when it actually cost him something. So I made a decision I'm not proud of and have never regretted. The engagement party would be my test. Vivian would go after me eventually, she always did, in those little gilded ways of hers, and when she did it in front of everyone. If Brennan stood up for me, defended me, chose me, then I'd tell him all of it that very night, and we'd face it together. And if he stayed in his chair, I'd have my answer. I should tell you how we met, because it matters. A charity 5K along the river 2.5 years back. I was running to clear my head after a bad week on the pediatric floor. He was running alone, no entourage, plain gray t-shirt, beat-up sneakers, nothing about him that whispered money. We both grabbed for the same paper cup at the water station and ended up laughing about it. He told me his name was Cole. His middle name, I'd learn much later. He said he worked in commercial real estate development, mostly affordable housing projects, and apologized for how dull that sounded. I told him it wasn't dull at all. It was important, and he looked at me like I'd handed him something. "You're the first person who's ever said that," he said. For 5 months I didn't know he was a Calloway. He drove a 6-year-old Honda he'd bought himself and refused to touch family money for anything with wheels. He listened when I talked about my kids on the floor, about why the work mattered. I fell for him because he seemed nothing like the wealthy people I'd learned to read at arm's length in my job. Then, one evening, he took me to meet his parents, and we pulled up to a brick estate in Indian Hill, and my stomach dropped through the floor because I recognized that address. It was printed on the bottom of every piece of foundation letterhead I'd ever filed. Cole, I said. What's your last name? He looked puzzled. Calloway. Brennan Calloway. I thought you knew. Your family's foundation paid for my nursing degree. He lit up like it was the most romantic thing he'd ever heard. That's incredible. That's fate. I made myself smile and said, yeah, fate, while something cold settled in my chest because I'd just realized I was in love with the heir to the institution I'd one day help run, and I had no idea yet what his mother had done. That first dinner, Vivian was perfectly polite in the way that feels like a hand around your throat. A scholarship, she said, smiling without any warmth. How resourceful. Brennan, you didn't mention she came from such humble beginnings. Brennan, bless him, was oblivious. Mom, she's a nurse. She graduated top of her class. Of course, Vivian said. We do so love a good success story. I drove home knowing she'd already decided I would never be enough. I just didn't know yet how far she'd go to prove it. The last week before the engagement party, she called me directly for the first time ever and asked me to lunch, just the two of us. She didn't waste time. She slid an envelope across the table and told me there was a check inside for $150,000 and that it was mine the moment I ended the engagement quietly. You could pay off your loans, she said. Help your mother start fresh somewhere new. I had no loans. I paid them off 2 years before, living on next to nothing. I'm not leaving Brennan, I said, and her smile dropped clean off her face. Then you'll regret staying. I stood, told her I'd see her at the party, and meant it as a promise. She heard it as a threat. She wasn't entirely wrong. So now you understand what I was carrying when I walked into that conservatory, and you understand why, when his chair scraped and went still, I already had the email half written in my head. The 11 days between the party and the board meeting were the longest of my life, and the strangest, because that's when the allies started appearing. Rhett called first and said whatever I needed, he was in. Then Brennan's father, Gerald, a man I'd always read as weak, a man who'd let Vivian run roughshod over the family for 30 years, asked to meet me alone. We sat in the same coffee shop on Vine, where Edmund had once asked me to be brave. He looked like he'd aged a decade in a week, unshaven, hollowed out. I've known about my wife's activities for 3 years, he said. No preamble, just the confession. I told myself it wasn't my place. My father was right to pick you. I'll testify, if it helps. I should have been the one. I wasn't brave enough. Why now? I asked. Because I watched my son's face at that party, he said. And I realized I'm the one who taught him to stay in his seat. I don't want to die having taught him only that. Then a board member I barely knew, a retired pediatrician in her 70s, named Marguerite Okafor, who'd spent her whole life on children's health equity, called me out of nowhere. Edmund had spoken to her before the end, she said. He'd told her he'd found someone brave enough to finish what he couldn't. I believe you, Delia, she said. I'll vote with you. By the morning of the meeting, I had evidence, allies, federal interest, and one more thing, Edmund's final letter, the one dated the week before he died. You are braver than this family ever was. Finish it. I got to my building at 7 that morning to set up. 23 chairs, 23 evidence packets, water pitchers, extra pens. The conference room walls were covered with photographs of kids the fund had helped over the years, and I'd printed 9 more and pinned them up among the rest, the 9 I'd interviewed, the ones who'd been turned away. I wore a plain navy suit off the rack, my hair pulled back, no jewelry. I wanted Vivian to see exactly what I was, the housekeeper's daughter. I wanted her to remember who she'd underestimated. People started arriving just before 10. The IRS agent, early and quiet. The assistant AG from the state's charitable division. The family attorney with a leather briefcase, older than I was. Board members trickling in, whispering, sensing something. The reporter from the Enquirer with a camera bag over his shoulder. At 10 on the nose, Vivian walked in expecting her meeting, her agenda, her room, and stopped dead when she saw 23 people, federal credentials on the table, a press camera, the attorney at one end, and me at the other. Her face went through it. Shock. Then fury. Then the mask sliding back into place. She looked at the attorney and said, "What is this?" "This is the meeting Ms. Marsh called," he said evenly. "Properly noticed. You received the email 11 days ago. I will not take part in this circus. The bylaws require your attendance. Refusal is itself a breach of fiduciary duty." She sat at the far end of the table, as far from me as the room allowed. Brennan came in behind her and, for the first time in his life, didn't sit on her side. He took a chair in the middle alone. I stood. I called the meeting to order, and then I started, calm and flat, no anger in it, just the facts. Over the past 5 years, the Callaway Children's Fund had denied 141 qualified applications. During that same window, $6.3 million had moved from the foundation to 4 shell companies owned by a single individual. I put up the first slide, a photo of Edmund with a group of grandkids at a luncheon, all of them grinning. Then I walked them through it. The bank statements. The Delaware filings, all 4 firms, same agent, same 8 months. The invoices for strategic advisory services with no deliverables attached, because there were no consultants, there was only Vivian, moving money meant for sick children into her own account. The IRS agent spoke up for the record and named the statute self-dealing, excise penalties, possible criminal referral. The assistant AG said the state was reviewing for prosecution. A board member stood up and walked out of the room, unable to sit through any more. Vivian's voice shook for the first time. Those were legitimate consulting fees. "Then show me one piece of work product," I said. "One report. One deliverable. That's proprietary." "There is no work product," I said, and I kept my voice level because level was so much worse for her than shouting. "Because there were no consultants. There was only you." I put up the families next. The denial letters with her signature. And then the email, subpoenaed off the foundation's own server, in which she'd instructed her staff to be more strategic about which families they funded, to favor applicants whose stories played well with the kind of donors the family wanted to keep. Marguerite Okafor, 3 seats down from her, started to cry without making a sound and didn't bother to wipe it away. Then I put up Edmund's letters. I read the 4th one aloud, his own words in his own hand. The part where Vivian told a dying man that soon all of it would be his anyway. The only sound in the room was the old pediatrician's quiet crying and the soft click of the reporter's camera. When I finished, I looked down the table at her. Edmund Callaway loved this foundation more than anything in his life. He couldn't bear to be the one to expose his own family, so he asked me to do it for him. I'm finishing what he started. She was given the chance to respond, and she took it the only way she knew how. She attacked me. A woman scorned, a gold digger, a manipulator who'd wormed her way into a grieving old man's confidence. The IRS agent cut her off and asked her plainly whether she denied the transfers had occurred. She faltered. Her own attorney leaned over and told her to stop talking, but she couldn't stop. "You people have no idea what it takes to protect a legacy," she said. "Sometimes there are sacrifices." And then she heard herself and stopped. But it was too late. The assistant AG looked up from his notes and asked, very quietly, whether she had just described denying treatment to sick children as a necessary sacrifice. I made the motion that the board suspend Vivian Callaway from all foundation duties immediately, that we authorize an independent forensic audit, that we cooperate fully with the IRS and the Attorney General, that we restore grants to every family wrongly denied wherever it was still possible to do so. All in favor. Hands went up around the table. Marguerite, Rhett, Gerald, the attorney. 4 more. 8 hands. Opposed. 3. Vivian and 2 loyalists. The motion carried. I told her she was suspended and that she would surrender her foundation credit cards and credentials before she left the building. She stood, her chair scraping loud against the floor, the same sound her son had made 11 days earlier, and she walked to the door. At the threshold, she turned and looked at me, and she didn't say a word, but the look said, "You'll regret this." I looked back at her, steady, the way I'd been steady all night at the conservatory, and I said the only thing I had left to say. The only thing I regret is not doing it sooner. Then she was gone, her heels clicking down the stairs and fading into nothing. The story broke online that evening and was national by morning. Vivian was arrested 2 weeks later on wire fraud and tax counts. Gerald wired $5.5 million of his own money to the fund to make the families whole, and then filed for divorce. He stepped in as interim chair, resigned his other boards, sold the house in Indian Hill, and moved into a modest place across the river. We reviewed all 141 denied applications and restored what we could. One of the mothers I'd interviewed, the one whose daughter had waited 14 months, emailed me to say her girl finally had her surgery scheduled. I printed that email and it hangs on my office wall. Vivian was sentenced the following year. The judge looked at her and said she had been entrusted with resources meant for the most vulnerable people there are, and she had stolen from them to live like a queen, and that her betrayal of that trust demanded real time behind bars. Brennan was in the gallery, sitting beside his father, not on his mother's side. When the marshals walked her out, she looked at him, and he looked at the floor. Brennan disappeared from my life for the better part of a year. I heard things, the way you do in a city that's smaller than it pretends to be. He quit his job, too many family ties tangled up in it. He started doing project work, pro bono, for a housing nonprofit on the west side, and paid his rent out of a modest salary from a second job at an architecture firm that had no idea who his mother was. He went to therapy twice a week, and he started showing up, Tuesday and Thursday evenings, to tutor kids at my foundation's after-school program. My staff mentioned it before I ever saw him there. "That quiet guy," they said, "never misses a shift. You know him?" "I used to," I said. He found his way back slowly. A letter left at the front desk asking for 20 minutes and nothing more, telling me he'd be at the coffee shop on Vine on a Tuesday and would wait an hour. I almost didn't go. Then I went. He'd gotten there early. Black coffee, cold and untouched. He stood when he saw me, and he didn't ask for forgiveness. He told me he'd spent the year learning why he'd stayed in his chair, and that the answer was just that he'd been a coward. That he'd been raised to believe loyalty meant protecting the name no matter what. And that I taught him loyalty actually meant protecting what's right, even when it costs you everything. He said he couldn't undo sitting down, but he could spend the rest of his life standing up. I told him the truth, which was that I didn't know if I could trust him again. He said he knew, and that he wasn't asking me to, not yet. So we started with coffee. Just coffee, Tuesdays, the same table, no promises. We talked for months. Some weeks I left feeling like maybe. Some weeks I left certain it was over. I made him no guarantees and he asked for none, and somewhere in there I realized I'd stopped checking the door to make sure I still knew where it was. There's a wall in my office now, covered in faces, more of them every year, including dozens of kids whose families Vivian once turned away. I was standing in front of it one evening after everyone had gone home when Brennan came in for his tutoring shift and stood beside me. We didn't say anything for a while. In the center of the wall there's a photo of Edmund now, and a small plaque under it. "His legacy lives. He'd be proud of you," Brennan said. "We finished it," I said. "You're here too. Only because you let me earn my way back. I don't know how this ends, the part with him. Maybe it builds into something. Maybe it builds into something. Maybe it stays exactly what it is, two people who hurt each other learning to be honest. But I know this much. I'll never again wait to find out whether the man beside me will stand. He stands now, week after week, in a room full of kids who needed someone too, and that's not nothing. My mother came to the program's open house last month and saw her own daughter's name on the director's door, and she cried the way she cried over that letter when I was 18. Except this time, it wasn't because the world had finally given us something. It was because I'd taken it. The thing I keep coming back to is that chair. The small, ordinary sound of it scraping the floor and then going still. Brennan didn't scream at me. He didn't throw me out. He just stayed in his seat when his mother told him to, and that quiet decision told me everything I'd spent 2 years refusing to see. Nothing in life happens out of nowhere. The way that night ended was built, piece by piece, out of every choice that came before it. Vivian spent decades believing she was untouchable, and that belief is exactly what made her careless. She left a paper trail. She insulted a dying man to his face and assumed he was too weak to write it down. Cruelty that goes unanswered for long enough starts to feel like permission, and permission is what undid her. I didn't take her apart because I was angry, though I was. I took her apart because Edmund handed me the one thing she never bothered to guard against, which was someone willing to do the careful, unglamorous work of building a case that would hold. Outrage on its own would have changed nothing. What mattered was the months of pulling tax filings at my kitchen table, cross-checking shell companies, interviewing parents who'd been turned away, documenting every step so cleanly that no expensive lawyer could wave it off. Knowing the right thing isn't enough. You have to be sharp enough to figure out how to make the right thing actually land, and patient enough to do it when it would be so much easier to just walk away quietly with her $150,000. And it took something else. Something I didn't know I had. Until that ballroom went silent. The strength to stand up with steady hands when every easy instinct is telling you to sit back down, smile, and keep the peace. My mother had that strength. She emptied other people's bedpans for 30 years so I'd have a shot at a different life, and she did it without ever once making me feel like it was a burden. That's where I learned it. Not in a classroom. At a kitchen counter, watching a woman with cracked red hands refuse to be small. If you take anything from what happened to me, let it be this. Build the kind of character that can look cruelty in the eye and refuse to flinch. Because that's the thing no amount of money can buy or fake. Sharpen your mind so that when the moment finally comes, you're not just righteous, you're ready. And steady your spine ahead of time, in all the small private ways, so that when the room goes quiet and everyone's watching, your hands don't shake. Brennan is still learning that week after week, in a room full of kids who needed someone to stand. I hope he gets there. But I'm not waiting on a chair to tell me who someone is anymore. I learned to read it the hard way, and I'll never unlearn it.